welcome back. So in Charlotte, we aim to be a city of superlatives, and we celebrate our global indicators of prosperity. We have the second largest banking center in the country. Many of you have just been through the sixth busiest airport in the world. We have a growth of advanced manufacturing that's 2 times the national average. We are top 10 tech talent hub. We're the 5th largest gaining metro. We love to see those descriptions of ourselves. But the story of economic growth and prosperity is really not the whole story for Charlotte. Out of the 50 most populous metropolitan areas for upward economic mobility, the Chetty study, as many of you all are familiar with, we ranked dead last in 2014. And what the Chetty team found was shocking to some, but confirmed what others have known and lived for generations in Charlotte. It's hard, if not impossible, to move up the economic ladder here. If you were a child, that's hard to see, I think. If you were a child born in the lowest quintile of our commuting zone around 1978, you were most likely to stay there, and by the time you were about 30, only about 1 in 3 would make it to the top 3 quintiles. A reminder that these income numbers are household numbers, and if you think about your budget and your expenses, and you look at those threshold numbers on the right, you recognize that even if folks were able to move to the 2nd or 3rd quintile, they were probably still struggling to get by. Again, this lack of mobility persisted despite high rates of job growth and other indicators, great indicators of prosperity of the previous 30 years. So quick shout out, is Ashley Clark in this space yet? Tomorrow, Ashley Clark and maybe Laura helped create this slide. I have been using it for 7 years now. I just want to give credit where credit is due. And let's take a look at Mecklenburg County, where we sit today, and the focus of most of the attention and fervor that came from our corporate, nonprofit, and government leaders. In Mecklenburg County, the economic mobility outcomes were very different for Black and white children. Of the children born in the bottom quintile, only 2.6% of Black children would make it to the top quintile, compared to 12% of white children, a percentage that was actually comparable to children in the most mobile cities in the study. And from the top quintile, Black children were almost as likely to fall into the lowest quintile as an adult as they were to remain at the top. So the news changed a bit last year. Our commuting zone is now 38th out of 50 for economic mobility. And for some better news, because 38 ain't great, Charlotte is ranked 3 out of 50 for making progress in economic mobility around the country. And it's the only county in the country where low-income white children did not lose economic footing. And so this has been actually pretty amazing to live through, to watch this kind of shock and shame from a 50 out of 50 designation, and to watch how the city kind of rallied around this, trying to change these outcomes. I'm really excited to have with us today 3 leaders who have lived this, eaten this, breathed this, and continue to do so, because in Charlotte, this really hasn't gone away yet. And so I'm happy to have with me Tanya Jameson. You don't see her on the program. She is jumping in for us at the last minute when our other speaker could not make it. Sherry Chisholm and Laura Yates Clark, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to get into some reflections on what this journey has looked like for us in our city. Tanya, introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Tanya Jameson. I am the Director of Civic Advancement at Leading on Opportunity. So what that means is my focus is on community engagement and specifically around policy and getting the community's input and priorities and working with the nonprofits to see what are the policies we should be focusing on advocating for.
Hi everyone, I'm Sherry Chisholm. I'm the Executive Director of Lead In on Opportunity. I've been with Lead In on Opportunity for the past 5 years.
Hello, I'm Laurie Yates Clark. I've been at the Foundation for the Carolinas as president for the last year. Prior to that, I was the CEO of Our United Way here in Charlotte. But more interesting to this conversation is probably that I was leading a neighborhood revitalization effort of a failed public housing project when this study came out.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Super excited about this conversation. I have told this panel this is a group of folks that they can be really honest with, so feel free. So Laura and Tanya, you all were both here when the news of the research, the Chetty study hit. Where were you? What do you remember about how this unfolded for our city?
At the time, I was an editor, website editor for a radio station when the news hit. And so I'll say honestly, when the news hit, as in like the academics and folks like yourself and Laura heard about it, it didn't really make a big impact at that time. But a couple of years later, we had a fatal police shooting of a black man. And so Charlotte erupted in a very agitated protest that led, and the protesters were smart though. They didn't just protest in their neighborhoods, they took their protests to the uptown area, which is our downtown, this area here. And so we saw windows smashed, and we saw a lot of upset folks that really got the attention of our leaders who were like, this isn't our Charlotte. And they were protesting and saying, we've been telling you all for a long time that our backs are against the wall and you are doing nothing to help us. And so that really woke up the community to what Laura's team, and Laura can talk about, what they'd been saying all along as a nonprofit.
Yeah, so I would concur with that. Again, I was working on the west side of Charlotte in a neighborhood revitalization effort. I think when the study first came out, you know, the Foundation for the Carolinas was sort of immediately paying attention. A study group had been put together, then the unrest happened. I don't think those of us it was shocking to so many in Charlotte, because we do think of ourselves as this like shiny city on a hill where everything is sort of sanitized and nice and beautiful and prosperous. I think for those of us that had been doing nonprofit type work for a long time, we're not surprised really at all. I mean, 47, 48, 50, you know, whatever. But the fact that we were at the bottom of the list just wasn't, I just didn't find it that shocking. So I don't think when it first came out, I really paid that much attention to it, to be honest. I mean, I was working in a neighborhood where generations of people had lived in poverty, thanks to really poor decisions made by mostly white people, you know, about how we were going to place public housing projects and how we were going to fund housing and all of those things. So, yeah, I don't think those of us that were in it were that surprised. But, you know, the fact that other people were led to some really great things. So that's good. It woke Charlotte up in some ways.
Sherry, you became the second executive director of Leading on Opportunity 5 years ago. Can you tell us about Leading on Opportunity itself as an organizational response to the ranking, and share what brought you here to actually lead this effort?
Yeah, I'll actually start with the first question,
Yeah,
or the second
sure.
question first. So I share this often because it's true, but I've shared already that my family's originally from Detroit, Michigan. And if you've never been to Detroit, it is effectively Alabama with snow. And I say that because so many of us of my generation identify as a millennial, you know, certainly many, not everyone, but if your parents aren't from, are likely not from Detroit, and then certainly your grandparents are not. Because Detroit was built, especially by black folks, as a part of the Great Migration. So it was black folks in the rural South who didn't have access to jobs because of Jim Crow, couldn't send their kids to the right schools because of Jim Crow, and also were the descendants of slaves who went north seeking better opportunity. So when there was no language around economic mobility, folks still knew if they didn't have it, and they knew that they needed to take big risks to get it. And so I am the benefit of, or benefiting from the decisions my grandparents made. So my grandfather worked on the line at Ford. My grandmother was a teacher's aide. The next generation, my mother went on to become an elementary school teacher, retired as a principal, and I started my career in public service working in school districts at the district level, so like with the superintendent. So because of the changes that my grandparents made, generation after generation, we were achieving better economically. So I understood that intuitively without like data to back it up, without a report, without Chetty telling me, like I understood how that worked. And so with that in mind, Detroit had been really great to our family. And then Detroit was hit really hard in the 80s. And I'm really open about this. Drug abuse in particular hit my family directly. And so in order to see the type of progress that my husband and I had been able to make, we wanted to move elsewhere to provide a more nurturing environment for our daughter. And so that is what brought us to Charlotte. So that is what situates and grounds me in the work. And so I make no bones about it. I've shared it with Laura, Tanya, Lori. We're here first for our family's economic mobility, where we can own a home and send our kids to school. And we get to do that on behalf of our neighbors and friends in Charlotte through our work at Leading on Opportunity. So in 2020, that's when I came in mind. I would not recommend doing this. 2020, I moved September, 7 months pregnant, during a pandemic, recently married, into a new job. Don't do it. Somehow I'm still standing. But it felt that urgent for us in terms of getting to someplace that felt more solid. And I moved understanding that from the Chetty study that Charlotte was 50 out of 50. But like I said before, that just made sense to me for a community in the Southeast to be struggling in that way. And just to clarify what Lori shared, when we look at the Chetty results, or to expound on what you said, Lori, we look at the Chetty results. In 1978, we were looking at someone who was born then, and how they would be doing it around age 32. So effectively, that is someone who identifies as Gen X. And then his more recent study is looking at someone born in 1992 and how they would be doing at age 32. So his information is always like looking at the past. And I think that was a big thing that Charlotte didn't understand in terms of when we took it on. In either case, it really galvanized change. And what I was excited about in 2020 is that a community had, for whatever reasons I didn't understand at the time, had said, we want to do something about this. We were not shying away from language around the impact of segregation. We were talking about the impact of relationships through social capital, as well as looking at the factors that we always know around education and early care and jobs. And so for me, that was a signal that the community was willing to do something different. And I think in bringing me in, was willing to do something different, also in bringing in a new perspective and voice to move that work forward.
Yeah. Could you tell them just a little bit about Leading Opportunity itself?
So Leading on Opportunity, as was shared, was spun out of the Chetty study. So the Chetty study comes out in 2014. Laura and Tanya talked about what those first couple of years were like. When we finally got to action, what happened was that a task force was put together to write a report, which is not unlike many other communities. What is going to be our response to this bad information we now know? And so a report was written. The second foundational thing that was, I think, continues to be unique is that an initiative was stood up at our community foundation, at Foundation for the Carolinas, and that is Leading on Opportunity. In 2017, the commitment was really broadly that the initiative would maintain our commitment to our task force report. It would carry out those recommendations in some form. And in Lori's encouragement to speak plainly, I think it took us a while to figure out what that looked like. Like, what does it look like to be an ecosystem or systems level organization that doesn't provide direct service, we don't give out funding, then exactly what is it that you're doing, right? Was the question that I got when I came in 4 years into the work. And so now Leading on Opportunity squarely sits as a systems level community consultant. We provide data, strategy, and policy to nonprofits who deliver work towards economic mobility, and we provide that same knowledge to funders of that work to help them make smarter investments towards economic mobility. And the goal is that if we do that well, then we're reducing the complexity that continues to grow in Charlotte as it becomes an even bigger city, and creating alignment among those organizations. And I get to do that work with Tanya.
Great. Well, to say, after a couple of years, after it finally starts to dawn on us, to say that we leaned in is really an understatement. We leaned in hard as a city to this work. At this point, I'm a faculty member in social work at UNC Charlotte. I'm a macro social worker. I'm actually watching mission statements, vision statements. I'm watching that kind of shift across the community. Everyone was tailoring their work around economic mobility. And I've been in Charlotte for 17 years. I've been a part of many plans, housing plans, homelessness plans, DNC coming to Charlotte, writing a plan. Like, I've been a part of plans that get written and actually do some good for a couple of years, but nothing had the staying power like this has had the staying power in Charlotte. Maybe it's the shame of the 50 out of 50, maybe it's just how really devastating some of this information was on paper. It stuck. The way we leaned has really been celebrated. There's some really good things there to also think about. But for the sake of learning, I'd like to peel back the layers of our Charlotte glow just a little bit. And I want the panelists to reflect on where did we stumble and what hard lessons are we still learning as we are in
We're year 10, almost 11.
Yeah,
Almost
10, 11. As we're a decade in, where do we stumble? What hard lessons are we learning? And I'll start where the energy is.
I think there's so many lessons to learn in work like this that really is generational work. And maybe that's where the first lesson is. Charlotte really has struggled traditionally with all those other plans, and maybe your communities do too. This is my hometown, so I only know this one. But we've really struggled to stick with anything. So we write these plans, we get all excited about it, we set completely unreasonable goals, we inevitably fail on the goal, we blame everybody but anybody that wrote the report or had anything to do with the report, and we move on to the next thing. Or funded the report. Amen to that, right? And the really unfortunate part about that is it almost always invariably reflects poorly on the people you were trying to help, right? Because as you shift that blame outwards, the only conclusion you can draw sometimes, if none of these other people are taking responsibility, is, well, it must have been the fault of the people in those neighborhoods or the people that were struggling. And we know that's not true. So, as Charlotte has gone through this, I think it's been great that we've stuck with it. We're still talking about it. United Way was a great example of what Lori was saying. We defunded all 100 partners that had been funded for decades. We shifted to a neighborhood and grassroots model explicitly focused on economic mobility. So there were a lot of really good things that happened. I think the test for us now, though, is how long are we really willing to dig in and stick with it. There were 100 recommendations in that report, and a lot of them would require, I went through, I've shared this with Tanya, but I went through when the report was first issued and put a P by all of the ones that were policy related, because that's really where the change happens. United Way funds great programs, but that's not really where the change is gonna happen ultimately. In Charlotte, sometimes we're in a bit of a bubble here, politically and in some other ways, and it can make us kind of ignore what we really need to do on a policy front. Tanya's done a great job of building our policy muscle and our advocacy muscle in Charlotte, because we just haven't really had to have it. But to do this kind of work, you've really got to be focused on that long-term systems change.
I'll also add that a big stumble in the very beginning was not really setting expectations. So when Leading on Opportunity was stood up, there were a lot of nonprofits that immediately were angry. They thought we were trying to I wasn't with the team then. I just joined. Sherry hired me when she came on board, so I've been there for 4 years now. But they were concerned that Leading on Opportunity was going to take over, it was going to get all the money, and it was going to duplicate what they were doing. And so it was a big stumbling block, because the report and the architects of the report didn't really have a vision for Leading on Opportunity. They said they just wanted to stand up that in organization. And so that was a huge stumbling block. And I think another stumbling block was also, we didn't really take the time to help the public understand what it really means to do economic mobility work. And so Sherry often lifts up the example when she first started that she would talk to organizations and people would be like, I've got a great dog walking business and I'm doing economic mobility. And Lori has probably seen it in the different grants proposals that come through to her as well. Like everybody in anything they did, they thought it was improving economic mobility. And so one of the first things we did once Sherry revamped the team was really set out for the community, like what does it mean to do economic mobility work? Are you working in child and family stability? Are you working in early childhood education? Are you working in, what's my other one?
Workforce? College and career readiness.
College and career readiness, which workforce comes under. And so in breaking it down, we also explained that, you have these big buckets, the others are impact of segregation and social capital. And so we break it down and say, you have these big buckets. These are the 5 things that the Opportunity Task Force report shows improves economic mobility, and then within those, say, for example, with college and career readiness, then you also have workforce development. So if your organization is doing some of these things and are focused in these areas, this is what's really going to improve really going to improve economic mobility. And so that was a huge stumbling block for the entire community, is really not knowing where, because people wanted to help, but they didn't really know where they fit in, and then some were just trying to tailor their ask to the report. So.
Can I add one thing? Yeah. We also stumbled, and this is again, and speaking candidly to a group of people that I don't know, but about something that would probably be very sensitive to some people who were involved. The report is not necessarily a research-informed collection of 100 strategies, right? The committee or the task force, whatever it was large. It had a lot of different interests represented. It was very diverse in all kinds of ways. All that great, but you would be naive to think that at some point politics didn't take over some of it, right? Or special interests didn't take over some of it. And you will see that reflected in that original report. There are strategies in there that not only are not research-informed or evidence-based, but I don't know what is the word I'm looking for, like the opposite of that, right? Marriage is promoted as we should promote marriage as a strategy. There are some things around birth control that we can talk about later that came from interest in that group that were not research informed. And I personally really struggled with that. Like these are things that could actually be harmful in some ways. I understand why it happened because I've been part of those processes, but I think for me, that was a real stumble on our part, that we didn't draw a hard line in the sand and say, if this is not at least a research-informed strategy, it doesn't make the report.
The city's at a different point then compared to now when it comes to data and research.
I hope.
I mean, you all, the Data Institute, you all have really helped elevate Leader in Opportunity, and so now everybody wants data, but back then nobody really did. There wasn't like an emphasis on research back then.
If you tried to raise the concern,
right.
You may not have been welcome back to some of those. I'm just hypothetically speaking, you might not have gotten
your chair disappeared from the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Other stumbling block challenges that you all want to elevate?
I will add one more. As we began doing the work, one of the things I noticed when I joined Leader in Opportunity was that there were a lot of meetings and coalitions and groups that were having meetings, and so I was on different meetings all day long, but like, say, Laura, for example, would be in every single meeting talking about, but with a different topic, and so much of the way that our government was approaching it and our nonprofit partners were approaching it was really siloed, and you can't talk about improving affordable housing without talking about workforce development and access to childcare. And so really trying to get the leaders in these positions to understand that everything is interconnected. And then the hugest stumbling block that Sherry and our team really focused on when we started was dispelling this idea that there's a silver bullet to fix it. Because a lot of people thought there was gonna be a silver bullet, and then the way we talk about it is that because Charlotte's a banking town, we think about things quarter over quarter, like when are we gonna, economic mobility should be just the stock market is going up. Economic mobility should be fixed by now. And so we really had to help dispel this idea that we would necessarily see economic mobility fixed within the next 5 years, which is kind of how it was promised too. So.
Yeah. bringing up just one thing I would add, that we're trying to get smarter about communicating. When you talk about systems work, there needs to be an entity to hold the system. So, while I just think it was so important that Lead In on Opportunity was created to provide that data strategy and policy so that the direct service folks can do their work well. Like, it just, doing the work of a community initiative or a systems level change is no one side hustle. Like, it is your full-time job. And so one of the things that I heard is that, the new executive director coming in that I had to get right is that I had to build a strong team that folks could trust. And so that's one of the things I think was a stumbling block early on. They were certainly very talented, but they were direct service experts. And the community said, we have folks who've been doing really good work. Laura was one of them. Like, I don't need another person, but I need you to bring expertise that helps me further my work. And so we were quite intentional around what it looked like to build a team of folks who had subject matter expertise in the 3 areas I identified, but who also knew Charlotte, because that was really important to meet folks where they were.
Yeah, great. I actually want to dig a little bit more into some particular challenges because Laura, I feel like we have bonded over the years about data practices that don't work. I met Laura 17 years ago, and we were trying to figure out how we were counting homelessness in Charlotte, and complaining together about, wait, this doesn't quite make sense. But what I heard Laura say over and over again during this period is just a reminder that correlation is not causation. And there was just so much stock put in family structure related to economic mobility, and these factors that the Chetty team identified really felt like they became gospel, and there was not a clear understanding that this is correlation and what that kind of, where we swim in it all the time, how that was not translating. Laura, I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I say all of this with all due respect to Chetty and his team. They're all smarter than I could ever be in my entire life. But I think we also have to recognize the difference between economists doing research and social scientists doing research. And so while I agree with the overall conclusion of the report, how they went about it would have looked different had it been a team of social scientists doing it, and the way they drew those conclusions may have been different. And so, I referenced the marriage and the birth control thing, and it was because there was clearly a conclusion that said 2-parent households are more economically mobile. Well, my first thought is because there's more money in the household, right? Like, to me, that seemed like that is not the way the conclusion got drawn for the study group. Mm-hmm. And because they hadn't engaged social scientists really robustly to help interpret what Chetty had said for us, I think they really missed some nuances of the data and led to just some really just not research informed. And also, I just really struggled with the marriage one personally because I just kept saying, this is probably also why I didn't get invited back sometimes, but I just kept saying, well, if you're going to promote marriage among the group of people we're mostly talking about, you're going to have to stop the mass incarceration of black men. Like, there was just so much, underlying it that they just didn't seem to quite understand with, I want to assume all good intention, but just didn't quite get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was not here for that portion, but I think
It was a lot of fun.
what Laura is lifting up is just how complex taking on this undertaking is. I think part of the reason that it gained so much traction in Charlotte, which is a finance and banking town, is that it was a report that came from an economist that created a economic development issue. Like, it was a brand issue for us because there wasn't a real understanding of what the data meant or what time period we were looking at. Folks said, well, if people move here, their kids won't be able to be successful. Like, they won't come work at the banks. Like, that is what people heard. That is what people thought was happening. And it lit fire under folks, which was great and we needed, but there were the expectation around when change would happen and what progress was look like.
And what led to the change.
Yeah, I think we're still working to tell that story in ways that resonate with folks.
I'll just add from a media perspective as a nugget, like what Laura and Sherry are saying are spot on, But if a study comes out and it says that your city sucks, it doesn't matter what the research method is. If that story catches fire, you have to be ready to respond to it, because right now, especially, like even back then, it wasn't as bad in the media, but right now they're stretched so thin. So you have to be prepared to tell your own story and counter those narratives and not necessarily get into, because when the second study came out, we had people in leadership on calls with us saying, well, the first study didn't have this. And I'm like, the average person does not care. All they're going to see is that headline. So make sure that you are ready in your organization to capture that fire when it's out there and tell your story.
Well, let's go there, and I just realized I've left that slide up. I didn't mean to do that, but we're there now. I do think, like, another stumbling block was this persistent question that I know the two of you have gotten ad nauseum. What are we ranked now? What is our ranking now? And so, I think the kind of methodological complexity of how you talk about this research was really one of those stumbling blocks early on, that people actually thought, oh, we can just do a quick another check and see where we're ranked, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. But yes, last year, Opportunity Insights updated their data with a new cohort born in 1992. And again, the updated data for Charlotte was widely seen as very positive, and we've actually kind of become a Raj Chetty exemplar as he goes here and there talking about his economic mobility work. And what should we be celebrating, and what should we be asking of our new and improved ranking? So what should we be celebrating, and what critical questions should we be asking?
I think the celebration is long, hard work pays off. I have been leading the work of Leading on Opportunity for the past 5 years. The work that's represented in that ranking happened well before I got here. And so part of that is like the truth-telling of that, right? And so, you lifted up, Lori, that we, got this recognition, that the community was really excited, and then the next question was, well, who gets to claim credit? Right? Do I get to say that what I did was a part of it? Did I fund the thing that made it? And then the truth is, like, it happened in the 90s and early 2000s. And so there is this tension around how do we tell the story of what it takes to undo generations of harm, and also celebrate that a community remains committed to it and is continuing to get smarter and savvier around how we're approaching it. So I sit with that when I look at our ranking of 38. And then I am really proud of the work that's happened over the course of the past 10 years. It has been fraught with all the things we've talked about, and we've remained committed to it. There continues to, we're here, talking about it. Funders continue to be interested. Nonprofits have been doing it for a really long time and will continue to. And so, kind of to Tanya's point about there being no silver bullet, our hope is that the work of Leading on Opportunity is seen in that ranking of 38. It's like we've provided more tools and information in your toolkit to keep going, not as a checkbox to say let's move on to the next thing, but we have a set of people, tools, resources to maybe help us do that one thing just a little bit better. And I think for folks who've committed to the work or who see themselves in the work like I do, again, that's something that we already know. Like what I'm working for now, my hope is that it's just a little bit better for my daughter, who's 4. And that in most moments, that feels like enough to keep me going.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyone else has anything? No? You said it well.
So let me ask this then. How has our rise in rankings changed the conversation and local action, or has it? What's changed since last year? Have you sensed a change in the tenor of how we talk about economic mobility?
Oh, for sure. And I think, the story has changed quite significantly, both locally and nationally. When we knew the study was coming out in 2024 and we knew it would be positive for Charlotte, I was really afraid that folks would say, okay, and now we're done, and seen, right? Racism has been solved, everybody, really. And while it hasn't been that significant, that jarring in terms of the response, what has been true is that folks are feeling the success. I think there's a level of pride in that. And there is a bit of, as Laura said, well, how much longer will you be able to maintain my attention to this? Like, and I say this, I think y'all will get it. I think we struggle as folks who fundraise to like keep poverty sexy. Like, what's the next thing? You know, folks ask Sherry, what's the next thing in economic mobility? Housing, jobs, education. Like, it's the same stuff, and it's been that for generations. But we come up with new ways to talk about it or new data sets to see the information in a different way, although it's the same thing. And so in Charlotte, we are thinking through right now really transparently, what does the next phase of economic mobility work look like for Lead In on Opportunity, such that we keep the community engaged and they don't feel that it needs to be abandoned and a new thing needs to be adopted that is actually just a part of economic mobility. So that's Charlotte. And then nationally, it's been really positive to see, I think other communities have been encouraged by our work and they want to take it on and do it too. So we've been thoughtful about how do we position the work that Lead In on Opportunity has done as like movement infrastructure is the language we've been talking about. It's not something that happens by happenstance, you know, it's not a miracle that we've made the change, but it's been by true, intentional, consistent work. And so our hope is that we can inspire and work with other communities that are trying to do that. And as you lifted up, Lori, it's been really awesome that, you know, Chetty's invited out and I'm invited out along with him, not with the same level of funding, but maybe one day we'll get there. But I think that communities understand that research creates the insights, but you need people in place to really drive the action.
I'll just add, Sherry and I swim in a lot bit different lanes in who she talks to, especially with national. On a local level with government, they are still very much focused on economic mobility. And so I listen to a lot of presentations and go to a lot of their presentations, and they use the term economic mobility a lot in their presentations with the different programs that they're putting in place or investments that they're making in neighborhoods and communities. They talk about, they use literally that graphic right there in their presentations. So it's great that although we are trying to figure out the best way to package and make poverty sexy, on a government level, though, they are still talking about economic mobility and wanting to make sure that they are lifting up the least of us.
All right, so for another heavy question, how are the numerous federal changes by the Trump administration shaping the latest iteration of this local conversation?
I'm not gonna lie, I just got back from a county meeting about the Medicaid SNAP cuts, and it was sobering. Like, I knew it was bad, but hearing the stories that the people are telling from the various nonprofits that are healthcare providers, et cetera, like, it's going to be no joke. And so what I'll say, and it's part of one of your questions about potential missed opportunities about making this a regional conversation, what was really encouraging at that meeting this morning was that we are all here. This is Mecklenburg County, and typically we talk about Charlotte, honestly. When we talk about things here, we really just talk about Charlotte. We're getting to the point where this was a county-led effort, and they invited in our regional partners, the regional counties of Cabarrus, which is like 20 minutes, and then Gaston and Rowan were also in the room. Like, their county, assistant county managers were in this room as part of this conversation. So what's happening at a federal level, I think if this is any indication, it is making our municipalities really see the need to not pay lip service to regionalism and really be intentional about regionalism in order to meet the challenges that are ahead for us now.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. I mean, our nonprofits are just being gutted. They're just, and even if they didn't directly receive federal funds, the domino effects of all of this are, I mean, I have not met with a nonprofit in almost 9 months now that hasn't told me some horrible story about what they're dealing with. I think that what Charlotte is at risk of particularly is we are known for our secret sauce of public-private partnerships that do a lot of the big work in town, right? Whether it was Leading on Opportunity or other things. But we, I think, have taken for granted that there has always been federal money coming in, right? So while we are considered a very generous city and very philanthropic and all of that, what we can do philanthropically pales so far in comparison to what we were getting from the federal government that I think that is going to be the wake-up call. The Foundation for the Carolinas is known as a community foundation that will go out and raise big money to address an issue, And within, the first few weeks, months of the administration, my phone was ringing off the hook with people saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to fix this? And I had to say, we can't. We cannot. There is no philanthropy that can solve the hole that can fill the hole that's being created. I think that is going to be a real wake-up call for Charlotte, because our philanthropy has always been the icing on the cake, but I don't think we realized it. So the nonprofits are struggling. Our number of applications for the limited discretionary funding we have are just out, through the roof. And these are, not huge grants that we're giving. So I think we've got to, my hope is that our tenaciousness and our commitment to economic mobility will continue through this very challenging time. And I think with all difficult situations, there will be bright spots. There will be good things that happen. Tanya referenced the regionalism. I think we'll see some nonprofit collaboration in ways we haven't. There will be silver linings. We have to believe that. Mm-hmm. But the number of people that are going to be harmed and not receive really critical services is going to be significant.
All right, so you all are in a room about 36 metro areas around the country, many of whom are involved in community conversations around data, neighborhoods, economic mobility, equity. Before we open it up for questions, what parting wisdom, you don't have to part, would you share from your experiences as a part of our economic mobility journey? What wisdom would you share?
We spoke to this a little bit, but just the importance of understanding your community, or getting to know your community, I would say, if you don't already. The Charlotte response worked for Charlotte. It is very much so data-centered. It is Charlotte-driven. It speaks the language of our corporate community. And I say this all the time, Detroit does not care where we are on the list, right? Like, that just does not appeal to us in that way. So find what makes sense for your community and make sure that's a part of the solution. I think the next thing is to remember that this work doesn't happen in silos. So it's all the more important to partner with folks across community and hire people to do that. It's really difficult for a nonprofit executive to provide direct service and then also find time to strategize with their partners. And the thing that I continue to be encouraged by is that change is possible, right? With hard work and commitment, change is possible, and we are experiencing it in Charlotte, and also really humbled by how much more work we have to do.
Be 50 and not 49, because I think if we'd been 49, we would not have cared this much. There was something so jarring. So, maybe it's not the ranking on the Chetty list, but what is the thing in your community that's really going to galvanize everybody, even if it's one data point, but it's going to get everybody around the table and they're not going to forget it.
I thought about this question in a totally different way when I saw it. So I was thinking, take care of yourself, find joy, play as much as Sherry knows how much I love me some play. But you have to take care of yourself, because this work is exhausting emotionally and mentally and physically. So make sure you're also taking care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help the communities that you want to help.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thank you all very much for contributing to this conversation. We have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience, and I think they're bringing mics around, so.
Be like the Reverend.
Go.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, my name's Mavis, and I'm from Rutgers University, Camden. I wanted to ask a question about the 38 versus 49 versus 50. And it really did seem like this report was a catalyst for some much needed action and sustainability in the space of enacting change. Do you feel like there's also a danger of over-anchoring to the rankings, where maybe if next year you're 39 or 40, or things kind of jump around, that there's a risk of external partners maybe not interpreting that correctly, and the change that you're wanting to see being directly and maybe over-connected to this one number? or for example, it takes 5 years to move 2 spots, and people are frustrated or not frustrated, or, you know, the rankings moving around being maybe a challenge, and how do you maybe protect against that? Because data is so important, but I think it can also be challenging to, you know, contextualize within the change making that you're trying to do, if that
Yes.
question makes sense.
100% makes sense, and I agree. So when I came in 2020, Chetty at that time was saying that he was not doing another ranking or study. So that was the information that we were working with at the time, which is why we started with data as our anchoring contribution to community. The language I was using then was that, you know, Chetty wasn't going to come save us, right? He showed us where we were. He highlighted some issues that some of us knew we already had. We needed to come up with some way for ourselves to hold ourselves accountable and to measure progress. And so Lead In on Opportunity has our local data tool, which calls the Opportunity Compass. The Opportunity Compass, we talk about it as leading indicators of economic mobility progress. It is all publicly available data that's been curated in easily accessible ways. And so it shows us every 2 to 3 years is about how we're pulling the data now. We'll come up with a new update at the end of this year. How we're tracking on, it'll be about 66 indicators of economic mobility. And those are traditional things that you know around, like home ownership, graduation rate, apprenticeship programs, but specific to Mecklenburg County. And so we released that tool in 2022. And so folks were, I think, moderately appeased by the fact that we had some way to measure ourselves. And then, quite honestly, Mavis, we were gifted with a study. So I imagine somebody paid Chetty enough to do another study. So he ended up doing another ranking. We did not know until the winter before it was released. It was released in summer 2024. We found out that fall that we would get a new ranking and that it would be positive. And so we use this as additional fuel to keep folks going, but we already have another tool that will be a more frequent measure of change. Right now, it looks like if Chetty were to do another study, the soonest one would be 10 years, and that's simply because you have to wait for people to grow up. So his data, you know, it takes time to measure the data, so we need some more time. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lee with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs in Minneapolis. I appreciate all of you illustrating the various impacts of and responses to research that's done about but not with communities and all the complexities you highlighted. I'm wondering how local power institutions like government, university, philanthropy can elevate local knowledge and lived experience in ways that inspire mobilization and support community ownership of narratives so that we're not overly attached to national studies that aren't reflective of local realities all the time.
I'll say when Sherry talks about the Opportunity Compass, one of the ways our data guy, his official title, but our data guru, our data guru was really intentional about community. He really wanted community to be involved, and so they used the metrics and everything you see, the research is saying, but we also did these community conversations and surveying and going out to communities to get them to rank the indicators and the determinants of economic mobility, and then he had some magical formula, and they were able to crunch the numbers, and that's how we ranked and said how we are doing on economic mobility, locally how we're doing. And we were also really intentional about going back to community, because one of the things we heard consistently was that you all, orgs like yours, come and you get our information, you get our data, and then we never hear back from you. So like right now, like next week, we'll have like a couple of sessions to report back because we've updated the Opportunity Compass. So that's what Leading on Opportunity is doing. And I will say though too, with our municipal government, especially our county, which is our soft services, they do a lot of surveying as well, which one of the concerns that, and Laura can probably talk about too, is survey fatigue in community, and communities feel like they've been surveyed to death. But we do try to make sure that with our work that we are out in community and getting feedback, and it's influencing the decisions that we make.
And I'll quickly answer that one too. We actually got a sizable grant as a part of the Charlotte Opportunity Insights Partnership, which was actually the first day of my job at the Urban Institute and the Data Trust involved actually meeting with the Chetty team. It was just, I've only known this job through kind of this lens. And the grant, the way we were able to use that grant was to, I mean, the purpose of us being included in the grant was to develop data capacity and research capacity at the local public university to actually support measurement around economic mobility and related issues. One of the ways that we've tackled that, and the Charlotte Regional Data Trust is a 501c3 integrated data system. Shout out to AISP in the room, another great networking partner. But one of the ways that we have used that is to actually address that power imbalance in research by also looking at the structure of our organization. So we have spent a lot of time developing out a community data advisory committee on our nonprofit board with non-tokenized representation to our board of directors that has fiduciary responsibility over the data. We had just sat our board just approved our first group of folks on that. We used data to tell us who was overrepresented in the data, and those committee chairs went and recruited using those data. It is a fully black and brown committee. We are really thinking about not only how the research is done, but how our organization is structured. And both of those things are really important. So,
question over here. Amanda from the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. I think my question kind of pairs well with Mavis's question, but it's sort of a broader question about how are you thinking about evaluation sort of in the moment, right? You have these sort of two bookends with the report, and you're also thinking about, like, how do we sort of set goals for the future that may or may not align with those reports, right? Like, our indicators don't always match economic ones, and that's good. But how are you sort of thinking about the sort of short-term evaluations? How do you sort of see that the slow churn and that slow gain? But how are you kind of thinking about, like, the long-term evaluation, the outcomes, the outputs, and, like, more importantly, the representation of the values that, like, communities want pushed forward?
Laura's much more the data person than I am, so I'm going to give you the perspective of someone who's more of a social scientist communicator, I suppose. We struggle with evaluation. Like, this is the honest answer, is that we didn't want the compass to be seen as something that was punitive or called people out, but we wanted to inspire civic imagination. And so we focused more of our energy there. Like, how can you use the data to inspire action, and have done no evaluation of nonprofits despite continuous requests to do so. We think that certainly serves, a role and a place, but in order to keep nonprofits engaged, they need to feel supported in their work, not like they might lose their funding as a result of engaging in it. So that's been the stance that Leading on Opportunity has taken, but it's inspired other community or other organizations to set goals. So we now have a new county manager for Mecklenburg County, and he's actively thinking about, well, what will the goals look like for the county, and ask Leading on Opportunity to have, be in conversation with him about that. Where does the opportunity compass sit in that? How can he then hold himself and his organization accountable? And that's the type of work that we want to do, where folks see a need for the data and how they set goals for themselves, but we don't play that evaluator role. And I know folks don't love it, but it's a stance that we've taken thus far.
I started my career as a program evaluator, and I've done like a 180 on how I feel about it. And most days I feel very conflicted, because having now run a small nonprofit, having now run a medium-sized nonprofit, I understand the perspective of what it's like trying to actually do decent research within that context, and it's nearly impossible. I think most nonprofits, if not all, want the data. They want to know, but they don't have the resources to do it. And they are very worried about it being used punitively. And I've seen it happen. I probably was one of those people who used it punitively, right, early in my career. And then karma never forgets an address, and I ran a nonprofit, right? And it was like, whoa, I had 15 minutes in 4 years or whatever to think about my logic model or outcomes or any of that. So I think somehow we've got to continue. And then there's the how we've used research to harm neighborhoods. And, so there's that layer too. I just think we're still seeking a balance in program evaluation of how to do it in a way that is helpful, not harmful, respectful, but useful. I understand from the perspective of having run a United Way, I had to have it because I was raising the money every year, right? It wasn't an endowment. I had to go make the case that we were doing something that was leading to valuable outcomes. Part of the road we took at United Way was being honest about that with our partners. Look, we don't love all of this either necessarily, or how we have to go about it. Let's work together as much as we can to make it as less painful and useful as possible, but here's why we have to do it. And we found that helped. I think a lot of times funders operate in a black box, and we're not explaining, why are we doing this? Why are we asking for these data? How are we using it? And how can we give it back to you so that it's useful to you too, and you're not just doing it for a year-end report? But all of that is with the backdrop of they all got real work to be going to do, right? And finding time, and they don't have data people on their staff. They've got, it's 2025, they got sticky notes or they're tick marking things in some cases, right? And I've been there. So I'm very conflicted about evaluation right now. I know we need it, I know it's important. I think it's really hard to do in a way that isn't harmful sometimes.
Yeah. I think the thing that I'm learning as I sit in a space where I'm fundraising at this level is that what is expected of a program is so different from what folks expect from their own children. And I can't understand why that's such a big leap to make. So, I think that folks see black male from a low-income environment. He goes through a 6 weeks apprenticeship program. Why should he not be successful at the end? And then in the same breath, they tell me, my kid is struggling, so I'm getting them an executive coach, and then they're going to take a semester off and just work at the golf course. And I'm like, and it feels very reasonable to them. And I get creating that space for your child. Why do you expect an individual in a different circumstance to operate like a widget? Right? You can't, if you were to evaluate your kid, he wouldn't be doing so great, right? And I think that is also why I struggle with evaluation. People just don't work in that way. Is it a useful tool? For sure. But as Laura said, we haven't figured it out.
Yes, Mike from Atlanta. Hi, Sherry. Atlanta's number 50.
Yeah,
so.
you're 50 now. Congratulations.
So yeah. I'm taking your advice. It's be number 50. It's yes, we are. And so obviously we're leaning into this work an awful lot. And one of the things that we're really, the first chunk of the elephant we're focusing on is social capital, because we do think that, there's a lot of secret sauce in social capital, and kind of addressing some of these challenges. So just talk a little bit about how intentional you guys are about building social capital, making those connections, any sort of best practices that you've seen in Charlotte around this notion of social capital.
I'll answer really briefly, and then I'm going to hand it to Laura. We were so intentional that in the first iteration of the Compass, we did not include social capital metrics because there's just not good data out there for us to gather, and we didn't feel comfortable with making something up. And that was really difficult for folks to understand, because I think social capital, because it is so relational, is where folks go to first. And because of that relational experience, it's often clouded by, or relational connection, it's clouded by your individual experience. And so in the first iteration, we did not release metrics, and we took another couple years to identify, where's there data in our community that we can effectively say aligns to the Chetty data, is available in our community, and we're just now preparing to release that. I think also a part of that is that there was a lot of confusion around what social capital means. And so as Tanya said early on, there was no definition of economic mobility. So we first started by defining the metrics of economic mobility that were readily available to introduce our community to that concept. And then we're coming with new information later. So our social capital, all that to say, our social capital metrics will be available this fall.
I don't really have anything to add. I think it is the thing that people go to often first because it's somehow relatable. I think it's the hardest thing to do and to measure. And going back to the original report, I remember reading that section and thinking, like, how are we going to do this, right? What does it actually mean? So I would just encourage you, one, to define it really clearly, what it means for your community, because people throw it around a lot here. And then what are the 1 or 2 or 3 strategies that you really feel like that are research informed that could impact it? Because it will become the thing that a lot of people are saying they're doing, but you don't really have a lot of evidence of outcomes around it.
Yeah, like the one to lift up that we know is a really strong indicator is the economic diversity of classrooms. A lot goes into how you would diversify a classroom. So we've been thoughtful around, well, what can we lift up that we could actually take action on? And so, for example, here we have a magnet school of the performing arts where we see the tightest level of economic connectedness is at the Northwest School of Arts. Because it doesn't matter if you come from high income or low income, it's about whether or not you can play a saxophone, and then you're being in constant connection with that person. So developing relationships, going to dinner, maybe playing on sports teams together. I think before we had that research, it was everyone needs a mentor, right? And that doesn't lead to the type of social capital that at least Chetty talks about building.
But it also speaks to the policy issues around that, right? So I think people also go to social capital because it feels like, well, I can take a mentor and do something, right? But we did have diverse classrooms in Charlotte, and we undid busing, in 2002, 2004, right? So now we have highly segregated schools again. You're not going to get to that. I mean, you can point to these one-off examples, sure, but you're not really going to get to it unless there's significant policy change. So I would also, I think, say, don't let people get away with thinking that social capital is like the soft, easy thing to address, because I don't know that it is.
So that actually leads me to my question. Hi again, my name is Amaris Mitchell. I'm with LISC in the New Jersey and Newark office. So I'm a community engagement and capacity building program officer, and my ears perked up at Tanya, you strengthening the advocacy and the policy arm or muscle connected to community engagement. So I was curious or wanted to hear you guys talk more about that. Thank you.
Well, when I started, as Laura said, the Opportunity Task Force report had 100 recommendations in it. And so I knew that we could not come out and say, these are going to be our policy priorities based on the Opportunity Task Force report. And so the first thing I really worked on was building relationships and strengthening relationships with the nonprofit community. And as Sherry said earlier, our business community is super strong here and very engaged. And so I felt like the way that we could really make policy change happen was to get our business community to start to advocate for economic mobility policies the same way that they advocate for trade, banking, whatever policies. And so we started with saying, all right, what are the issues that the business community is facing? And as Sherry said, at that time, we were coming out of COVID, and so they were saying transportation, housing, and childcare were the biggest barriers for their workforce development, and that's what they were concerned about, was workforce development. How do we attract and retain workers once we get them? And so then I had a conversation with our nonprofit partners saying, what are the barriers that your clients are facing? And they said, how do we get our clients into jobs and get them to be successful and stay in those jobs? The barriers that we're seeing are childcare, transportation, and affordable housing. And so they had the same barriers. And so at the time, as I said, it was pandemic era, childcare was bubbling up in the national conversation as a crisis. And so I said, well, let me focus on childcare to engage the business community in a space they don't typically play in. And so we then began, we took to them and said, hey, we're going to reframe how we didn't tell them this, but in my head I was saying, we're going to change the way that we think about the child care crisis, because typically when you think about it, it's like the single mom working at McDonald's doesn't have a babysitter. And so now we're saying, no, it's actually the manager of a company who does not have childcare, and she also could be married, to Laura's point. She could be married, and they might need childcare as well. And so we said, this is a workforce development issue. This is a workforce issue in general. And so we began educating the business community about, while the child care crisis, there is a child care crisis, because we are in a banking town, they're like, they should just raise their prices and it'll all be fine. And we're like, no, it already costs more to have your child in childcare than it does to go to college, so that's not the solution to it. So we explained the problem to them. We brought our nonprofit partners along as well, and then I really leaned on the nonprofits to say, okay, what are the policy solutions? And so I will tell you, especially if you are into childcare, early childhood education, they can get real weedsy. So I was like, we got to make this really simple for the business community. And so we, out of all the things they wanted, I said, we're going to focus on extending the ARPA compensation grants. And we just need you all to advocate for $300 million from our state legislature. We'll make it super easy for you. So we created form letters for them to be able to send. We gave them a list of key legislators and said, here are the key legislators that will be voting on the budget. Here are their phone numbers, here are their email addresses, reach out to them. And so we really just spent a lot of time in childcare. So we call that one Influencing the Influencer track. And then we also have a track we call Influencing the Policy Itself. And with that, I have served, as I said, affordable housing is one of our priority areas, as well as transportation. And so with that, our city is really big on having community committees with community members on those committees. And so I've applied and been on various committees that our city council uses, and those committees make recommendations, policy recommendations to city council. And so we've been able to help design an anti-displacement framework, and now currently I'm on a committee around transportation because we're trying to pass a transportation referendum. And so we want to make sure that as we really look to build out our transportation system, that we are being mindful about displacement and of not only people, residents in their homes, but also displacement of small businesses, and making sure that as this system is built out, it's also equitable, even though we can't say the E word, but making sure that this, the system is also equitable so that our low-income communities have the same type of amenities at their bus stops as our high-end communities, et cetera. So. But what was the question? Granular level, got it, okay. Yeah, they do ask, like, how, that was one of the earliest questions when the study came out was, we have all this displacement, we have all these new people moving in, and so, but Chetty's tracking, if not mistaken, like social security numbers, like individual, like they have access, yeah, they have access to tax information, so they're actually tracking individuals. Yeah, so, Yeah, they're tracking. So they're tracking individuals. So that accounts for the question of if people are moving in and out of Charlotte. But what I'll say with the opportunity compass that we are doing, we are looking at publicly available data. So that is not as granular as individuals. We're looking at publicly available data for that. So to say basically how is our community doing as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, it would be ideal to do what you're talking about, but I think it's really challenging. I think about the arrogance I had now as an evaluator to be like, why can't you follow up with people 6 months, a year from now, whatever, right? Like, it's nearly impossible. They don't have the infrastructure to do that. So from a nonprofit perspective anyway, I think it's something everybody would love to do, but can be really hard to track over time.
Yeah, and the one piece I would add is we do disaggregate by gender and race, and then in terms of the mobility metric, we were able to look at who, like if folks moved, if they were moving in county or with inter-county, within county, intra or inter-county, we were able to identify that. And the most movement we've seen in the past few years was actually folks within Mecklenburg County moving to other places in Mecklenburg County. Yeah.
All right, thank you all so much.